Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, we're going to react to hurricane insurance unavailable for many as insurance companies flee the state. So I read an article this morning, or I scanned it at least, and it basically said that people in Florida are having a hard time claiming on their insurance policies, specific policies designed to protect against what happened. So hurricanes, flooding, which is insane to me. Like, how can you pay into a policy? So every month you pay X amount. I read some people are paying as much as $1,000 a month, which for insurance to me is just crazy. All for the company to say, oh, sorry, we can't help you. The one thing that you were paying for, we actually turns out we don't have to help you with it. Like, this should be illegal. What's going on here?
Milton is the fifth hurricane to hit the U.S. this year, and that means many Americans are losing their homes.
Wow.
Now, flood insurance is supposed to help out, but it is becoming harder and harder to find. Regulators can't force private insurers to offer coverage, and companies can leave the state entirely if they're losing money.
Unprotected.
Florida insurers have declared bankruptcy or otherwise failed since 2003. Now, homeowners and businesses in flood-prone areas often turn to the National Flood Insurance Program. It insures 4.7 million properties nationwide.
Now, much of the structure of federal insurance protections is based on the assumption that the government's maps of which regions are most at risk are accurate. But FEMA's flood maps have not been updated for decades, according to the Hills reporting. So where does that leave the millions of homeowners in Milton's wake?
I mean, look, I'm going to have a take here that is kind of controversial, and maybe people watching won't even like it, but if no insurance program is willing to offer you insurance for your home, on some level, that's the market sending a signal that owning a home there is too risky.
It's dangerous. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Oh, man. It's kind of harsh, though, to say that, look, if you can't get the insurance, leave.
And you shouldn't do it. I mean, I would not think that the government compelling insurance companies to provide you insurance to live there would be subsidizing risk that we're all now paying for. We, the citizens who pay our tax dollars, are paying for you to take that risk. I mean, think of like, the government subsidizing risky oil, like deep water drilling, right? If they're going to pay for it, that's incentivizing risky behavior. If you can't do that on the market because your liabilities are too great, that's the market sending a signal, don't do.
It's a fair point. Can you force an insurance company to offer insurance?
Do that.
Right, but then what happens to people who don't have the money to move house? I mean, then they're just messed up in a pretty big way because there isn't any insurance available to them. It's fine to say, yes, well, that is the market sending a signal. I don't disagree that it is, but if you have a house that you've lived in for 20 or 30 years is now more susceptible to these disasters and you don't have the financial wherewithal to go anywhere.
That's a good point. If you can't afford it, and before that area wasn't prone for flooding and hurricanes,
then what do you do? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I kind of fall in the middle on this one because I understand both arguments. It's obviously tragic when people feel like they need to either sell their house or they can't get insurance. And you see a lot of people stay in their homes even when they're in these evacuation zones because they sort of have this belief that if they're there, maybe they can, something bad won't happen. I don't really understand that logic, but I also understand not wanting to abandon your home, your property, if you're not able to pack up and take it all with you. But at the same time, we wouldn't really make the same argument if someone built their house on the side of a cliff, right? We would say that that's a risk that you accept. It's reasonable that an insurance company wouldn't want to insure your home.
It's not entirely the same, though, because it feels like this hurricane, Milton in particular, and Helene, were just particularly more powerful than hurricanes usually are. I know Idalia was pretty bad, but I don't think it was as bad as Helene, was it, in terms of the fatality rate?
So, yeah, I'm kind of stuck in the middle here.
I mean, I have no love for insurance companies.
Right.
I think they're often very scammy, and we all have to have car insurance, and if you live in an apartment, you have to have renter's insurance. Car insurance is, in my view, like notoriously scammy, where they go
What is renter's
out of their way to find excuses not to cover, and you got to read the fine print and go, oh wait, I do have to pay this time. Why do we even have this? And you're required to have it under the law. or it comes into medical insurance, obviously, was a big part of the Obamacare stuff, that we all have to be covered because no one wants to live in a world where if you don't have insurance and you're in a car accident, the ambulance is going to decide not to take you. We don't really accept that, but, we want to make these things more cost efficient for taxpayers. You want to align, market incentives with risk to discourage risk, and have it, be in such a way that we're not all, that then there's these emergency situations that the public has to pay for. And on some level, that is what's occurring with these hurricanes or extreme weather, is they're taking on the risk, the people who live there, and we're all going to end up paying for it.
And a number of private insurance companies in Florida have gone bankrupt because of previous natural disasters that they've had to foot the bill for. So then the question becomes, is it appropriate for the government to step in with some sort of government-issued...
You would think so. Yeah, I would think that the government should probably step in at that point, because if they don't, first of all, why do people pay taxes? It's for things like this, for extraordinary events, right? And B, the government is there to look after its citizens, no?
Insurance, or to underwrite those things. I would argue that there are cases in which it is, and I think that's where we probably differ. But I do think that it is a complicated situation, because you don't actually want to incentivize people to live in places that their houses are going to be regularly destroyed.
I definitely think if the government says, we're going to insure you, we're going to give you so much money protection in the event of a catastrophic weather event, if you live there, and that's the deal, then they should follow. I don't think they should renege on that promise to people if you decide to live there under that basis. I'm not saying yank the rug out from anybody. It just seems like we should maybe structure this differently moving forward.
Are house prices I'm sure now they're going to be, but historically, were house prices in the areas that were damaged by Milton and Helene lower than they are, in other areas in Florida? Because if so, one could argue that, the price that people have to pay to repair their property is kind of offset by the price they paid initially for the property. But even if you paid, let's say, 50% less than market rate for a Florida property, if you have to completely rebuild that house, you're still going to end up paying more than you would have paid for a property in Florida that would have been safe, like in a safer area, if you see what I mean.
As climate change or changing weather patterns make it less practical to live on the coast and more practical to live on the vast and empty interior of the country, where you can actually find very affordable housing.
Yeah, I guess my only thing with the insurance
there,
companies in their decision to pull
jobs
out of Florida, statewide in a lot of cases, is that there is some conflicting science on whether or not storms are actually consistently getting more extreme. If you look at some of the climate models, they've gotten slightly more extreme, but then the amount of damage and deaths has gone down significantly as we have been able to sort of shore up our infrastructure to prepare for these disasters. So on some level, I wonder if they aren't sort of just making an excuse because they know that Florida is going to be a more expensive place to insure, just because it has more hurricanes than the rest of the country in general, not necessarily because they're getting more frequent or more extreme because of climate change. I mean, there was
a peninsula dangling in the ocean. I don't know why they designed Florida like that.
I mean, there was a 1937 flood of Paducah, Kentucky that nobody could have anticipated, and if that happened today, we'd be like, oh my God, it's because of climate change that this happened. So that's a little interesting. I think a lot of people also, when talking about this, forget that flood insurance is usually an add-on to a home insurance policy.
Yeah, it's not a standalone. Where do you guys stand on this? Do you think insurance companies should be compelled by government to offer flood insurance? But you can't really do that unless the government underwrites the policies. So if people actually claim on the policies, the government has to pay a certain proportion of it. Because if the company knows it's going to go bust, if lots of people are going to claim on those policies, it's not really a viable product, is it? Oh, man. But the humanitarian side of it is people should be able to insure their homes. It's a really difficult one, this one.
So pretty much anywhere you buy a house, it's not automatically included. You have to basically request it, and then the rate would differ, of course, based on where you live. So a lot of people don't have flood insurance just because it's not included in their typical home policy. And a lot of people make the perhaps false assumption that because they don't live in an area or that because it's not automatically included, that must mean they don't need it.
The house I lived in growing up in suburban Detroit, Michigan, had some kind of foundation problem, and when we had an epic storm like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, the basement totally flooded, wrecked all the walls. My parents had to put in tons and tons and tons of money to dig under the house and install these like pillars to like lift the house out of the ground. You couldn't open the front door anymore because it was hitting the ground. It was crazy. And they had to put in tons of money to do that.
No insurance?
Again, it's not something you would have anticipated necessarily. That's just the risk you take if you don't have an insurance program.
And a lot of these insurance policies don't cover natural disasters, right? Like the flooding is usually related to like a burst pipe or something related to the home.
Well, and that's what does annoy me, because that ends up being a little bit scammy.
It should cover natural disasters, in my opinion. It should. Like if you're going to cover flooding from a burst pipe, why wouldn't you cover flooding from a hurricane? Like, ultimately, it's the same type of damage, isn't it? You know, like, why does it matter if one's from a pipe and one's from a hurricane?
Right. You know, you never read the fine print. You're like, oh wait, it's not. Well, then what am I paying for if it's not doesn't cover this? You know, not likely, but more likely than any other. What, somebody has to come with buckets of water and dump them into my basement for it to be covered by insurance?
Yeah. I wonder, though, in the case of Florida specifically, like, I get the point that you don't want to incentivize the equivalent of someone building their house on the cliff edge, right? I totally get that. But does Florida have an interest in people not being so hit or affected financially by these kind of things that they actually leave the state?
Sure.
It does, because if people start leaving en masse, property taxes, everything, income taxes, it's going to decrease,
completely.
Right?
Is there a legitimate interest of the state there in trying to create some sort of level of basic security so that in a situation like you were describing, although from a natural disaster, if your parents had not had the means to do those repairs, they would presumably have had to move. And that seems just not a very wise course.
You know, I think that's a very compelling argument for the people of Florida specifically. I think it's maybe harder to make that argument that, you know, the entire country should have to provide some subsidy for people to live in Florida, but other people in Florida, I get that argument. Much more coming up on Rising.
Interesting here. I had an article here. So, insurance nightmare unfolds for Florida homeowners after back-to-back hurricanes. Many victims facing catastrophic losses due to water damage are just walking away. So they're just walking away from the houses. Bridget Bello thought she had undertaken proper precautions to protect against Florida's notorious hurricanes, having purchased flood insurance as well as a separate hurricane-specific policy in addition to her regular homeowners coverage. Yet nearly 2 weeks after Helene hit, and even before Milton had arrived, what Bello 54 describes as an insurance nightmare has only begun. She said she already faces delays and denials on her insurance claims. Like, this is wild, man. She's purchased 2 policies, like 2 specific policies for this. Like, we did everything we were supposed to do, said Bello, who lives near the barrier island, Madeira Beach. We did everything to protect ourselves and protect our homes. This is just wild, man. This is just wild. Man, I mean, it's a really hard question to answer. I think the state of Florida is probably going to have to step in here. Like, if the federal state doesn't, you know, underwrite or at least offer some kind of emergency funding for the peoples of Florida whose homes were wrecked, if all these people leave, they're going to take their income taxes with them, especially if they leave the state. So it's not in their interest for thousands of people to just up and leave the state of Florida. So I think, they're going to have to really help out here. And on the second note, you know, the insurance companies that have taken people's money, you know, for hurricane-specific policies, and you're refusing to pay, I think they should be taken to court. I mean, of course they should, right? Imagine you paid for a hurricane insurance policy. The hurricane happens and they're like, nope, sorry, I can't pay. It's madness. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing.